How's it going, YouTube? Welcome to another episode of BB's Finds. It's the only show on YouTube where a guy talked about his collections while sitting in a closet that's shared with his wife. Extemporaneously talks about his collections. I don't do much in terms of research. It's pretty much all in my head. There's a lot of happy mistakes or, some things that from time to time I'm a little off on. So bear with me. Extemporaneous man right here. I'm not one of these guys who's just going to sit there and study and learn everything and cram. And then, like they do on podcasts where you can tell they spend so much time. They just want to get it right. I really don't care about that. I'm just trying to have fun and trying to give you something to watch and enjoy and share my interest with you. The closet that I mentioned, not all my collections are in here. As you can see, there's wife's clothes behind me. It's kind of a nice backdrop. If we showed the other side, you'd be like, oh my god. I got comic books, books, just regular books, some toys as well. Downstairs I have some records, DVDs, CDs, things like that. So we've already done a number of episodes. There was a request to do this one, the music of John Carpenter. And it also talk about the films of John Carpenter, kind of to preface the discussion of the music. What's unique about John Carpenter is, as a film director, he scores a lot of his own films, not all of them, but most. He also a couple years ago played live with his band. His son is part of the band. It's a bunch of younger guys, but John Carpenter plays the keyboards, and it was great. We went, my buddy of mine, went to go see him play live down in downtown LA, and it was awesome. Just a lot of horror fans there, and just a lot of people that appreciate the movies and things like that. He usually probably played like one track for each of his movies, like his big stuff. Like he did did like Christine, which I'm not going to talk about today. He did Assault on Precinct 23, which again I'm not going to talk about today much. Did some other stuff. So let's get into it a little bit. I just want to talk you through some of the movies and some of the various genres of his movies to kind of give you a feel of where he's coming from his music. So most people know John Carpenter as the guy who directed Halloween. Pretty well known film. Probably top 5 horror film of all time, if not top 3. For most people, my friend Matt, who's probably watching this, it's his favorite film of all time. Matt's like the expert. He's been on game shows about his knowledge, his Halloween knowledge, and he's just a wealth of knowledge. And he goes to Carpenter Halloween conventions and things like that, and meets with. I think he's actually met with some of the people we're going to be discussing today. The other musician that played with him on some of the earlier soundtrack stuff, Alan Haworth. Yeah, so let's get into it. So, like I said, Carpenter's known for Halloween. He originally intended Halloween to be an anthology series. So film 1 was going to be Michael Myers, film 2 was going to be something else, film 3 was going to be something else, film 4 was going to be something else. What it turned out to be is film 1, Michael Myers, film 2, Michael Myers, film 3, not Michael Myers, film 4, Michael Myers, film 5. So it was basically an FU to, film 3 was kind of like an FU to the producers or the production studios for his original vision. He kind of wanted to do like each movie is a separate story where there's not like so much continuity. But what it ended up turning out to be is sort of the legacy of Michael Myers. Halloween 3 for me is enjoyable because it's not Michael Myers. It's a departure. It's kind of in line with Carpenter's original vision. Has to do with these kids around the world on Halloween getting these masks that are made by this kind of clandestine company that turns out to be has to do with the druids and sort of like almost like dark magic, like Irish people that use pieces of artifacts that are embedded in the chips, like the microchips inside of these masks. That when they're exposed to some certain thing on a television, that they bring forth like evil, like snakes will come out of it, or maggots or bats or what have not, and it's one of the movies where it's kind of it's open. The ending is kind of not the most uplifting thing, but it's still enjoyable nonetheless. It's got a great film score. it's just it's a movie that you got not many people like it because there's no Michael Myers, but I like it because it's different. Uh, Carpenter just kind of being kind of goofy with his storytelling as he usually is. There's typically a sense of humor with his storytelling. Not only does he do horror, he also does kind of sci-fi movies from time to time, and then he kind of combines the genres and does like sci-fi horror movies. So I want to talk about his earliest film called Dark Star. He did not, as far as I know, did not do the film score for this, but he worked on this movie with Dan O'Bannon, who went on to do a lot of production work and production design with the Alien films. So O'Bannon's like a heavy with among the Alien community or Alien fans, not the Alien community. Area 51, huh? But no, he's like Giger and H.R. Giger, who I discussed last video when I talked about Dune, the Jodorowsky's Dune, was working with Dan O'Bannon and a few others on the Ridley Scott Alien movie in the 80s. And without his vision and without his kind of wackiness and kind of the influence from Carpenter, I don't know if Alien would be what it is. This is a movie from '76, so this is before Star Wars, 1 year before Star Wars. There was a film short that was done in I think like '74 about this film, and they kind of expounded upon it when they had more funding. It's an existential space movie. There's essentially these three guys flying around this spaceship that has this dropping nukes and obliterating planets. Think of it as like a very small scale version of the Death Star, and they're experiencing cabin fever, which is very similar to where a lot of us are going through right now, kind of with the stay-at-home coronavirus thing going on. So there's a lot of people just kind of talking to themselves. You can't tell if they're really going crazy or if they're just amusing themselves by passing the time in the way that they do. There's an alien in this movie that's essentially a beach ball. It's like a red beach ball. It's kind of funny. Just a real funny movie. If anyone's fans of the band Pinback, one of the main characters in this is Pinback, and the band actually, I think they're fans of Carpenter as well. I wouldn't put it past them, but they named their band after Pinback from Dark Star. Okay, so next up we got Halloween 2, Halloween 3. This is a combo DVD. Again, this stuff isn't really anything special. I only got about 4 things here that are kind of unique. The rest of this stuff is pretty run-of-the-mill. You can find it pretty reasonably priced online or at your local used CD/DVD store. Support those guys because even if you can buy online right now, because they need the help to stay in business. Without them, we wouldn't have. It would just be us and Amazon. So yeah, Halloween 2, Michael Myers. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Check both out. They're awesome. Next up, I want to talk about one of my favorite Carpenter movies. It's The Thing. What makes The Thing so great is it combines kind of sci-fi and horror elements. The score is not done by John Carpenter, which is kind of unique for a Carpenter film. It's a Morricone score, Ennio Morricone, who did a lot of the spaghetti western stuff, Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more. Just a huge body of work in terms of the music, film music and things like that. But the thing has to do with this base, this scientific base in Antarctica, in this essentially this creature that is able to morph into other creatures and things like that. It's so the characters in the movie are dealing with a lot of uncertainty and how to deal with the thing, and how to defeat it. Kurt Russell is the main character, plays the helicopter pilot, just a kind of a badass in this movie. I like to say that this movie has probably the most amount of flares and dynamite and flamethrowers of any movie I've ever seen. Claim to fame. There's really not so much in the way of guns and things like that. They're mostly trying to just blow things up and just burn the hell out of things. And there's a few other actors in this, like Wilford Brimley and a few other guys that you'll probably know as well. this is the ultimate in alien terror. Yeah, it's a great movie. Good for watching every couple years or so. Repeat watch. It's not something that you watch once and you're done. It's got rewatch value. A lot of video games now are kind of based on the thing, from my understanding, and there's some stuff that goes on in terms of like first person, like kind of like the Doom scenario. How they make some of these first person shooter games. So let's talk about some more Kurt Russell movies with John Carpenter. So we have Escape from New York. I discussed this one a little bit in my Jack Kirby video because I was talking about Commandy. Escape from New York has to do with this guy, Snake Plissken, played by Kurt Russell, who he's sort of this criminal in kind of post-apocalyptic times who gets enlisted to rescue the president whose plane has been shot down in New York City. New York City at that time is this renegade island where it's just lawlessness and it's run by gangs and things like that. Fantastic film. Very 80s in terms of the filmmaking. Highly recommended watching this if you haven't seen it. Next up, we got Big Trouble in Little China, another of the classic Kurt Russell, John Carpenter films. What's awesome about this movie is Kurt Russell kind of plays a goofball. Jack Burton, not really like an action hero. He always ends up kind of messing things up. And the movie is very woke in the fact that in terms of who is the true hero, it's his buddy that he hangs out with. I forget the character's name, but it's one of the first times that there's like an Asian American guy who's like really the voice of reason in an action film, beside like just karate and things like that, where it's very stereotypical, or like kung fu type films. So it's kind of nice to see that that it almost like undermines race itself, which to me is an artificial construct, but there's a lot of talk about this movie and its wokeness. It's sort of in our times. The film's very funny. It has a lot of elements of humor and just kind of weird, wacky stuff. David Lopan, for example, is this emperor guy who he's sort of like the main bad in the movie, but he kind of keeps transforming into like from a young man to old man. And there's the three storms. They kind of look like Raiden from Mortal Kombat with like the hats and stuff, and they can produce lightning, and it's just a funny movie all around. Egg Shen, forget the actor's name is like Victor Wong, I want to say, but he's great. He plays like this like tour bus driver in Chinatown in San Francisco, and he's like the grandpa in Three Ninjas movies and things like that. But it's a fantastic film. I think it's a good. It's very lighthearted for a Carpenter film. Very funny. I think the guy who did the screenplay also did maybe the initial draft of the screenplay, also did the Buckaroo Banzai movie. So that's same style of humor. Next up, we got In the Mouth of Madness. This is sort of like I would say it's a little bit Stephen King-esque. Sam Neill's in it. Sam Neill from Jurassic Park fame, Alan Grant from Jurassic Park. And it's about, an author who's he's sort of living out his own books and things like that. It's a horror film. It's a weird movie, and a lot of crazy scenes and things like that. Where we can't really, reality starts blending with what's in his head, and he doesn't know what's real and what's not. Next up, we got Prince of Darkness. This is probably one of the darker, aptly, because of the darkness thing, but this Satan's coming back to Earth and things like that, and there's a little bit of elements of time travel, which is cool. We got some sci-fi tropes blended with horror tropes, and then next up we have one of my favorites, They Live. This is a movie that if you've ever seen a movie called A Pervert's Guide to Ideology, what's his name? Slavoj Žižek, the critical theory critical theory guy. He did this movie about film and ideology, but he uses this like as his first example about how things are presented to us and how we perceive them. It all has to do in this movie. It's very clear. It's a very important movie, I think, in our times. Is to see like they put on these special sunglasses that enable them to see the true meaning of like whatever's being marketed to them. So that's like where you get obey from. You can see on the back. You've probably seen like T-shirts and things like that that have obey written on it. That's where they get that from. And it says like you'll see like a billboard for like a vacation spot, and it'll say like breed, reproduce, spend money, stuff like that. So more or less, it's about the subliminal messages that are beamed into our heads from the powers that be, and the Roddy Piper, the wrestlers in this movie, plays the main character. Wears the special sunglasses which enable him to see these slogans for what they really are and advertising for what it really is. There's kind of like goofy looking aliens, kind of look like skeletons that are the main bad guys that are like, you could think of them almost like the 1% in terms of the powers that be and people that have a kind of a stranglehold on society. It's also the movie that the catchphrase I'm here to kick ass and chew gum, and I'm all out of gum, bubble gum. Roddy Piper. So I want to talk now about the music. So that's pretty much my DVD collection of Carpenter films. Let's talk a little bit about the music. So Carpenter did a lot of his own film scoring, as I mentioned. He's a synthesizer player. A lot of this stuff has very it's very monotonous, kind of Halloween-y vibes, but it's actually the basis for a lot of things that are making a comeback now, kind of. I'm just thinking here of Stranger Things, like the Stranger Things soundtrack, from Netflix, and as well as like the Mandy soundtrack, which is phenomenal. Both the movie and the soundtrack are so good. I can't recommend it highly enough. If you have a library card, I believe it's still streaming on Canopy. If not, definitely check it out. It's worth renting if you haven't seen it. Nicolas Cage. I can appreciate Nicolas Cage. It's a very cagey performance, but I don't really go for that whole ironic Cage thing. I go for the more just like, okay, like Cage just emoting and things like that. It's can't beat it. Okay, so let's work backwards. Let's try to think how to divvy this up. So let's do this. Let's talk about Escape from New York soundtrack. So here's a CD version of Escape from New York. It's a lot of the synthesizer music. This one is done with John Carpenter and Alan Haworth, who's his sort of his musical accomplice on the earlier records. This is not a limited print CD, from what I gather, but it's still kind of harder to find in CD form. For whatever reason, science fiction and horror movie CDs they're getting harder to come by. I actually collect not only Carpenter stuff, but all RoboCop and Predator and fantasy film soundtracks like Conan the Barbarian and Legend, if I can find them. Tangerine Dream did Legend. The soundtrack itself, a lot of the very classic Carpenter synthesizer stuff. There's also one or two tracks on here that are taken from other sources. I think it's like American Bandstand, I want to say. Ernest Borgnine's in the movie, and when he plays a cab driver, when the cab pulls up, I believe the American Bandstand theme is playing. Next up, we got Halloween 3: Season of the Witch. This CD is limited to 1,000 units. I'm lucky enough to have a used record shop that's by me near where I live that had a copy of this. They have a lot of soundtracks, or at least they did for a time. They were getting a lot of very limited stuff in. This one was I think like 10 or so bucks for it was sealed. Of course, I opened it up and listened to it, but yeah, it's only limited to about a thousand. There's been a big demand for the vinyl releases, or what I call records. A lot of people call them vinyls. I don't know what the hell that's all about, but records or LP releases of original horror soundtracks. There's a company called Mondo that produces this, and the thing I kind of don't like about that is you end up paying like 30-40 bucks for them, and it's stuff. It is a collector and a guy who likes to hunt things down a little bit. It just seems kind of dumb to pay that much money for a record that's brand new, unless it's something like the Blade Runner soundtrack, which I purchased that. There was a limited run on that. It's like 180 gram vinyl, but I can't resist Blade Runner soundtrack. We'll get to that in another video. I think I've got maybe about 7 different versions of the soundtrack. I've got a problem. Anyway, next up we got Prince of Darkness. I bought it at the same store. This one's limited to 1,500 units. We've got some sound bites from the movie and things like that. This is a two-disc set here with some pictures and some cool liner notes inside. Again, this is a Carpenter Haworth collaboration. You got the priest on the back there. Yeah, it's pretty awesome stuff. I think this is on... Yeah, it's Alan Haworth's CD label. This is number 003. The Halloween one is 001. And then same place, I got a They Live soundtrack. These babies are kind of hard to come by. Only 1,000 units of these were made. This is a 20th anniversary edition CD. There's some sound bites on here as well. It's a Carpenter Haworth. This is 002. So I got 001, 002, 003. There's some other stuff there. I think I gave my friend the Halloween 2 soundtrack. There's like 1,000 units, limited edition. I just kind of handed it to him. He's a very big fan of the franchise, as we mentioned earlier. This has some music. It's almost like a country or kind of slower influence. It's not as much of the synthesizer stuff as like Halloween 3 or Escape from New York. Next up, we got this an LP version of the Escape from New York soundtrack. I found this at a thrift store for $1, as I find most of my records at thrift stores. This is just an amazing find for a thrift store, and this was only a couple years ago that I found it, believe it or not. And the record itself is in great shape. It's got the original sticker on it. Some music composed by John Carpenter and Alan Haworth right there. So that's pretty much it for the older stuff. As I mentioned earlier, I did see John Carpenter play live. When I saw him play live, he played not only the stuff from like about one song from each movie, but he also played some of his stuff that he refers to as lost themes, which are songs he's written for movies that were never made. So here we have a CD version of Carpenter. This is Lost Themes 1. There's 9 tracks on this. It's fantastic stuff, very synth based. But he plays with a band on this. I think he plays with his son and one of the other guys in his band, his live band. It's there's a guitar and bass and things like that, so it's not only synth. And here we have Carpenter's Lost Themes 2. This has, 12 tracks on it. There's a CD only bonus track. It's fantastic stuff. They did a LP release of this as well. For some reason, I don't know. I want to keep all my Carpenter stuff mostly in CD form. I feel like if I can find old LPs like the Escape from New York, that's fine. But I just don't want to. I can't justify spending $30 or $40 every time something new comes out. In terms of trying to buy all these repressed LPs, the sound quality, who knows how they master them. I've got a lot of fundamental issues with repress labels and things like that. We can get into that some other time when we discuss records. But yeah, these CDs sound fine. You know, I'm a very casual listener. Even so, even if I listen to a record, I'm not an audiophile by any means in terms of, you know, it has to be on the best gear and best speakers and best headphones and all this crap. I just like to listen to stuff. I just like to consume. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We're about 25 minutes in, which is kind of what I've been doing the last few times. If you have any questions, hit me up. If you have any comments or suggestions on what I should do next, let me know. I think I'm gonna do a Twin Peaks or David Lynch, sort of a slim down. It's going to be more of a talking video, as if this wasn't. But the Lynch stuff is very limited to the mythology behind Lynch. I mean, it's more about the narrative and the story of Twin Peaks rather than the showing items and talking about the various things. So that's pretty much it. I hope everyone's having a great day, staying safe and healthy out there, and we'll see you soon. Yeah.